Welcome to Sign Facts, where every movie hides a secret. Every scene tells a deeper story. And every frame contains details most viewers never notice, from legendary blockbusters and mind-bending science fiction to dark thrillers, unforgettable horror, and hidden cinematic gems. We explore the facts, theories, Easter eggs, behind-the-scenes secrets, and untold stories that make movies truly unforgettable. This isn't just watching movies, this is discovering what lies beneath them. Subscribe to Sign Facts and step beyond the screen. The rivers are swollen and dangerous, and no commercial boat operator is willing to take the group inland. Sam's wife suggests they try to find a local river captain instead. At a riverside bar, they track down a grizzled fisherman named Bill and offer him $25,000 for the trip. Bill scoffs, insisting he's the only one crazy enough to sail in these conditions, and demands double, with no alternative. Mitchell reluctantly agrees. The next day, the group boards Bill's aging boat, where they meet his quiet assistant, Tran, and get a tour of their cramped living quarters. Later, Jack shows Bill a map of where the orchid was previously discovered. Bill quickly points out that the original route is likely flooded and dangerous. With time running out, Cole, the team's geographer, analyzes satellite data and suggests a safer alternate path. Bill accepts the plan and begins navigating upriver. As the rain intensifies, communication with headquarters becomes unstable and eventually cuts out completely. With no signal and nowhere to turn back, the team settles in for the night. During dinner, Bill's pet monkey, Kong, sneaks toward the table to steal bananas. Bill, assuming the animal has already eaten, angrily kicks him away. Kong climbs onto the roof to grab fruit from nearby trees, but the boat keeps moving and the monkey is left behind. Alone in the jungle, Kong cries out before resigning himself to eating fruit on his own. His peace doesn't last long. A colossal anaconda emerges and begins stalking him. The monkey flees, hiding in hollow logs and climbing trees as the snake slowly follows. Back on the boat, Bill hears Kong's distant screams but mistakes them for jungle wildlife. He won't realize his pet is missing until the next morning. Meanwhile, researcher Gail checks to see if communication has returned. When she leans against a faulty hatch, it suddenly gives way and she plunges into the river. Sam orders Tran to slow the boat as everyone rushes to help, but the blood from Gail's injury draws a lurking crocodile. The beast attacks from behind, forcing Bill to dive in and fight it off. After a brutal struggle, Bill stabs the crocodile through the eyes, killing it, and climbs back onto the boat, battered but victorious. Moments later, the river churns as the giant anaconda surfaces and swallows the crocodile's corpse whole, unseen by the crew, oblivious to the danger still lurking nearby. The group focuses on treating Gail's wound. Suddenly, Kong drops from above into the center of the boat, startling everyone. Relieved, Bill calms his shaken pet. Later, Bill pulls Jack aside for a private conversation. He warns that the river is rising fast and that their planned route may soon become impassable if they want to survive. They'll need to change course again. Realizing this will cost them at least 2 extra days, Jack tries to sweeten the deal by offering Bill an additional $50,000 to press forward despite the danger. After a brief pause, the captain agrees, leaving Tran to handle the night watch. Bill heads to his cabin to rest. At first light, Bill jolts awake, sensing something is wrong. Floating debris carried by the swollen river has damaged the boat's steering system. He rushes to make emergency repairs, adjusting the engine and trying to force the vessel forward, but the propeller is completely jammed. Before anyone can react, the boat sails straight past the turn-off and toward a violent waterfall ahead. With no control left, Bill can only watch as the vessel plunges over the edge, slams into the rocks below, and breaks apart in the shallow water. Thrown into the river, the crew struggles to stay afloat. Bill shouts for everyone to swim toward shore. As they fight the current, an unseen danger stalks them beneath the surface as the massive anaconda lunges toward Sam, nearly pulling her under. At the last possible moment she scrambles onto dry land, and the snake mysteriously retreats back into the water. Once everyone is safe, the group takes stock of what little equipment survived the wreck. Miraculously, one satellite phone still works and even a signal. Knowing that rescue by the authorities could take days, Bill decides to contact an old friend who regularly sails these waters, arranging to meet him several kilometers ahead along the riverbank. Bill explains that going around the river the normal way would take 2 full days, but cutting straight through the jungle could get them there before nightfall. Despite the obvious risks, the group agrees, and after ending the call, Bill leads them into the thick forest. Eventually they reach a wide river with no clear way around it. Bill wades in first, signaling the others to follow. None of them realizing the anaconda is already circling beneath the surface. Halfway across, Cole suddenly feels something brush past him and shouts a warning. Bill dismisses it as a harmless fish and urges everyone to keep moving. At the rear, Ben is joking with Gale when something violently yanks him underwater. The group rushes back in a panic as Ben resurfaces, badly wounded. Before anyone can react, the enormous snake bursts from the water and drags him under again, killing him in seconds. Horrified, the survivors flee to the opposite shore and keep running until they're safely away. Once they stop, Bill tries to calm them, explaining that anacondas are territorial and rarely hunt again right after feeding according to him, they shouldn't run into it again anytime soon. Clinging to that reassurance, the group resumes its trek toward the rescue boat. Jack and Mitchell object, insisting they can't abandon the mission when the orchids are so close to blooming. While the others seem torn, Bill makes his stance clear. Once they reach the boat, the expedition is over, and he's taking everyone home. Jack reminds him of their agreement, but Bill tells him he can keep the money. He refuses to risk any more lives. Afterward, Bill privately tells Sam that he regrets taking the extra payment, blaming himself for what happened to Ben. A short distance later, as they push through thick brush, Mitchell spots something wriggling behind Cole's neck, a massive leech. Bill quickly uses a lighter to force it off, only to discover dozens more attached to Cole's back. While Bill removes the parasites, Mitchell tends to Cole's injured feet. As Mitchell reaches for his boot, Tran stops him and warns that a deadly stone spider is hiding inside. Jack, fascinated, carefully traps the creature in a jar, already thinking about its scientific value. Elsewhere, Bill's friend is sailing toward the meeting point when something slams into his boat, knocking over his drink. Assuming it's debris, he slows down to investigate. Instead, another giant anaconda launches itself aboard, latching onto his leg. Despite desperately clinging to the wheel, he's dragged overboard and devoured. In the struggle, the engine reactivates, sending the unmanned boat crashing into the shore in a fiery explosion. From a distance, the survivors see the flames and head toward the crash site. They find the boat destroyed and assume the man fell in drunk and drowned. Bill orders everyone to search the wreckage for supplies. While doing so, Jack quietly pockets a revolver he finds without telling the others. Despite the chaos, they manage to recover useful gear, fuel, flares, and other supplies. Exhausted and shaken, the group finally sits down to rest, unaware that the jungle's dangers are far from over. While scouting the shoreline, Mitchell notices the remains of several fish scattered across the sand, torn apart in a way that doesn't look natural. Wondering what could have done it, he voices his concern. Tran immediately recognizes the signs and explains that locals were responsible, which means there must be a village nearby. If they can find it, they might be able to borrow a boat and finally make it back to civilization. With renewed purpose, the group pushes through the jungle once more. Before long they stumble on a horrifying sight: John's body lying near a tree, partially covered in vegetation. Bill quickly realizes what happened, that the anaconda expelled him mid-digestion. This confirms his fear that there are multiple snakes roaming the area, and he explains that if the animal regurgitated its prey, it's likely still hungry. Gale reminds him that he'd previously said anacondas are territorial. Bill agrees, but clarifies that the rules change during mating season. At that time, males travel long distances in search of a female, which means the forest could be crawling with aggressive, starving predators. With time running out, the group presses on. Eventually they reach the village, but instead of finding help, they're met with silence. The huts are abandoned, and the only sign of life is a dead anaconda lying in the center of the settlement, with an indigenous man still trapped inside its body. It's clear the villagers fled in panic. At the dock, the survivors discover every boat is gone. If they want to leave, they'll have to build something themselves. Using debris from the huts, the group begins constructing a crude raft. While the others work, Jack steps away to rinse his face and notices something unusual in a basin, an orchid clinging to the side. Instantly energized, he calls Sam over, and the discovery leads him to a chilling realization that the orchid's life-extending properties are affecting the wildlife. The snakes aren't just surviving longer, they're growing larger and more dangerous. Jack is ecstatic, convinced this proves his theory, and pushes harder than ever to continue the mission and collect the flowers. This time, though, everyone pushes back, including Mitchell, when Sam reveals that Jack secretly offered Bill another $50,000 to stay in the flooded river. The group turns against him completely. Furious and isolated, Jack storms off, refusing to help finish the raft. By morning the raft is complete. While the others secure it, Mitchell returns to the main hut to treat his injured foot. Searching for supplies, he opens Jack's pack and finds the jar containing the spider but dismisses it as useless. Digging deeper, he uncovers John's revolver and a phone that still has power. Realizing Jack kept these hidden, Mitchell tries calling for help, but Jack appears and demands they continue the orchid hunt. When Mitchell refuses, Jack snaps. He opens the jar and throws the spider onto Mitchell's arm, where it bites him instantly. As Mitchell collapses in agony, Jack takes the gun and phone and walks out, leaving his partner paralyzed. Near the shore, the others are preparing to depart when Jack returns and coldly tells them to leave Mitchell behind. Suspicious, Sam heads back to the hut and finds Mitchell completely immobilized, a bite mark spreading across his arm. Inside, Mitchell spots the anaconda creeping up behind her and desperately tries to warn her with his eyes, but she doesn't understand and leaves to confront Jack. As the argument escalates outside, it ends abruptly when they realize Mitchell is already being swallowed alive. The group rushes back toward the hut, leaving Jack alone with the raft. Exactly what he wants. Seizing the moment, Jack escapes with it. In a desperate attempt to kill the snake, the survivors set the hut on fire and flee back to the shore. But with the raft gone and the village destroyed, they have no choice but to pursue Jack on foot. Knowing his obsession, Sam suggests cutting through the jungle to ambush him near the orchids. The chase is brutal as the group is repeatedly harassed by snakes, forcing them off course. Eventually they tumble into a ravine and land inside a massive snake's den. With no way back, they're forced to move forward through the cave system. During the crawl, Cole drops his flashlight into the water and pauses to retrieve it, a delay that proves costly. As he becomes separated from the others, realizing he's missing, Tran backtracks and finds Cole in a state of panic, surrounded by skeletal remains, barely holding himself together. Trailing behind the others now, Tran and Cole rush to catch up. In his haste, Tran fails to notice a weakened section of ground beneath his feet. The earth collapses, and he slips into a tight underground passage, wedged in with no way to climb out on his own. Cole desperately tries to pull him free, but the space is too narrow. While Tran struggles to breathe, he reaches an air pocket, only to realize he's no longer alone. An anaconda silently glides toward him through the flooded tunnel and pulls him under. Terrified, Cole bolts through the caverns and eventually reunites with the rest of the group, who are already crawling toward an exit. Unknowingly, he's leading the snake straight toward them. The survivors scramble to escape as the massive body follows close behind. Once the others make it through, Cole attempts to exit but gets stuck between the rocks. The group pulls with everything they have while the snake closes in, and at the last second they free him. Sam swings her machete, severing the anaconda's head. Relieved and exhilarated, Cole begins celebrating until another colossal snake snatches him from behind and drags him into the jungle. Without hesitation, Bill and the others chase after them. They find Cole being crushed in the creature's coils. Thinking fast, Bill hurls his knife, striking the snake in the head and forcing it to release its grip. Cole collapses to the ground, shaken but alive. Elsewhere, Jack reaches the spot where the orchids were first discovered. Leaving the raft behind, he ventures into the forest and quickly stumbles on an entire field of the rare flowers. Obsessed, he begins harvesting them. Meanwhile, the others sneak closer, planning to steal back the raft while Jack is distracted, but a snapped branch gives them away. Unaware he's been spotted, Jack returns to the raft just as Sam starts searching through his bag. Jack suddenly appears behind her. While she keeps him talking, Bill prepares to throw his knife, but Jack notices and fires a warning shot. Forced to surrender, the group is marched back to the orchid field. Jack knocks Bill unconscious and orders Gale to restrain Cole. With no resistance left, Jack forces Sam to gather orchids, making her cross a narrow log suspended above the snake's nest. Fighting panic, she inches across and reaches the flowers. On her way back, the log begins to crack, and Jack coldly orders her to drop the backpack. She obeys, and Jack is about to leave when Bill reappears and blindsides him with a punch. The bag tumbles close to the nest. Bill, injured, is quickly overpowered and knocked out again. Jack retrieves the bag, but fate turns on him as the stone spider escapes and bites him, triggering paralysis. As his body locks up, Jack loses his footing and tumbles into the heart of the nest, orchids and all. The snakes swarm and devour him alive, mirroring Mitchell's fate. Nearby, Cole and Gale rush to help Sam, whose leg is tangled in a vine. The added strain causes the log to collapse, leaving her hanging upside down over the nest. An anaconda rises toward her as she struggles. The vine finally snaps and Sam falls into the water among the snakes. Against all odds, she manages to escape and claw her way out, but one of the creatures lunges toward Gale. Gale douses it with a container of fuel, filling its mouth with gasoline. Bill grabs Jack's revolver and pulls the trigger, only to find it's empty. Just when all hope seems lost, Cole fires a flare straight into the snake's mouth. Flames erupt instantly, and the burning creature crashes back into the nest, igniting the fuel and triggering a massive explosion. The resulting landslide buries the remaining anacondas once and for all. After everything they've endured, the survivors finally reclaim the raft and begin the journey home alive together, with Kong safely by their side. Analysis: this sequel didn't play it safe. Most movie sequels try to repeat the formula, and some try to go bigger, but Anaconda's The Hunt for the Blood Orchid does something different. It drops the camp, cranks up the danger, and turns the jungle itself into a death trap. This isn't just another big snake movie, it's a survival story where nature is smarter, faster, and completely unforgiving. This time, the anacondas aren't accidental monsters, they're the result of human greed, fed, empowered, and unleashed by mankind's obsession with pushing limits it was never meant to cross. What makes this film stand out is escalation. The jungle closes in, the body count rises, and every mistake is punished immediately. There's no charming villain here, no witty relief, just people who realize far too late that they are no longer the hunters. In this piece, we're diving into why The Hunt for the Blood Orchid is often overlooked, how it quietly improves on the original, and why it deserves a second look as a pure survival creature thriller. Because once this expedition enters the jungle, there's no winning, only surviving. A mission driven by hope turns into a fight for survival. Released in 2004, Anacondas, The Hunt for the Blood Orchid doesn't just continue a story, it resets the entire playing field. New characters, new location, new rules. You don't need to remember the first movie, because this one stands on its own. At its core, the film blends adventure, horror, and survival thriller, shifting away from camp and leaning into raw tension. The tone is darker, more serious, and far less forgiving. The story unfolds deep within the remote jungles of Borneo, a place untouched, unpredictable, and brutally hostile. This isn't just a backdrop, it's an active threat. Every river bend, every shadow in the trees feels dangerous. The premise is deceptively simple. A scientific expedition races against time to locate a rare plant known as the blood orchid, believed to hold life-extending properties. If they succeed, it could change medicine forever. But the jungle doesn't give up miracles without consequences. What begins as a hopeful, well-funded mission quickly turns into a nightmare as the team realizes they're not alone, and they're not at the top of the food chain. This is a story about ambition walking straight into danger and discovering that some places were never meant to be conquered. It isn't just a monster movie, it's a warning. At first glance, Anacondas, the hunt for the blood orchid looks like a classic creature feature. Giant snakes, an isolated jungle, people getting picked off one by one. But beneath the surface, the film is driven by something far more unsettling: a human greed. The blood orchid represents the ultimate temptation: longer life, more time, more control, and every step toward it pulls the characters further away from safety and deeper into chaos. The genre blend is intentional. Adventure pulls them into the jungle, horror punishes them for being there, and survival thriller keeps the tension constant, reminding us that escape is never guaranteed. Emotionally, the film shifts from confidence to fear to desperation. Early optimism fades fast as teamwork breaks down and self-preservation takes over. Trust becomes fragile, panic becomes contagious. This movie is made for viewers who enjoy high-stakes survival stories where nature isn't just scenery, it's the enemy. If you're drawn to films where humans are exposed, vulnerable, and completely outmatched, this one speaks directly to that fear. Because in this jungle, the real monster isn't the snake, it's the choice to go in at all. Everything goes wrong the moment they ignore the warnings. The story begins with ambition disguised as science. A pharmaceutical-backed expedition heads into the jungles of Borneo, racing against time to locate a rare plant believed to hold the secret to a longer life: the blood orchid. Their journey is meant to be quick and calculated. Follow the river, reach the site, get out before the floods arrive. But almost immediately things feel off. They encounter abandoned camps and missing researchers, signs that others came here first and never returned. Every warning is brushed aside, every delay justified by the promise of what waits ahead. As the team pushes deeper into the jungle, the truth slowly reveals itself. The blood orchid doesn't just extend life in humans, it supercharges everything that feeds on it, including the anacondas. What follows isn't a single attack but a pattern. The snakes learn, they adapt, they stop reacting and start hunting. Each encounter becomes deadlier than the last. As the jungle tightens its grip and escape routes disappear, panic fractures the group, trust erodes, and survival instinct replaces logic. One by one, the expedition collapses under the weight of its own decisions. By the time the survivors understand the rules of this jungle, it's already too late. Because this was never a mission about discovery, it was a countdown to extinction. The jungle doesn't care who survives, only that balance is restored. In the final moments of the film, the illusion of control is completely gone. There's no mission left, no discovery left, only escape. The remaining survivors don't defeat the anacondas, they outlast them. Through sacrifice, desperation, and sheer instinct, they manage to break free from the jungle's grip, not because they're stronger, but because the jungle allows it. And that's the point. The blood orchid, the very reason this nightmare began, remains behind, untouched, unclaimed, still growing. The film makes it clear that humanity doesn't win here, it retreats. Symbolically, the ending reinforces a brutal truth: nature corrects imbalance violently. The oversized, hyper-aggressive snakes were never the problem, they were the consequence, a response to interference. There's also a quiet warning embedded in the final moments: just because the survivors escaped doesn't mean the danger is gone. The jungle remains, the orchid remains, and the cycle can always begin again. No triumphant victory, no heroic conquest, just a reminder that some secrets are protected for a reason. The jungle is watching long before the snakes strike. In this film, the anacondas may be the killers, but the jungle is the true antagonist. From the very first frames, the environment is framed as overwhelming. Characters are constantly dwarfed by towering trees, swallowed by fog, or boxed in by narrow river paths. Visually, the film keeps reminding us how small and exposed humans really are. The snakes themselves aren't just monsters, they're symbols of correction. Every time the humans push deeper, take shortcuts, or rush the mission, the jungle responds with precision and violence. The anacondas grow larger because greed feeds them, literally and figuratively. Foreshadowing is subtle but persistent. Rising water levels signal time running out. Broken equipment hints at how human technology fails in natural territory. Even early dialogue about beating the flood quietly predicts the disaster to come. There's also a recurring visual pattern: a pathways closing, exits disappearing, options shrinking, that mirrors the character's psychological state. Confidence collapsing into panic as the jungle tightens its grip. Nothing here is accidental. Every vine, every shadow, every silent pause serves one purpose: to remind us that nature doesn't hunt randomly, it reacts. What makes this movie work is how much of it was actually real. The production behind Anacondas, the hunt for the Blood Orchid, was almost as demanding as the story it tells. Unlike many creature films of the time, this sequel leaned heavily on practical effects. Full-scale animatronic snakes were built to give actors something real to react to: weight, texture, and presence that CGI alone couldn't replicate. Digital effects were then layered on top to enhance movement and scale, not replace reality. The cast didn't shoot on soundstages alone. Many scenes were filmed in harsh jungle conditions, dealing with extreme humidity, unpredictable weather, and swarms of insects. A lot of that physical exhaustion on screen wasn't acting. The tonal shift from the first film was intentional. Humor was stripped back, the body count was raised, and several more graphic moments were actually cut down to secure a wider theatrical release. And here's a detail most viewers miss: the snake's behavior changes throughout the film. Early encounters feel chaotic, but later attacks appear strategic, echoing the story's idea that these creatures aren't just big array, they're evolving. Sometimes the realism behind the camera is what makes the danger feel real on screen. This sequel understood what the original got wrong. Placed next to Anaconda, 1997, the difference is immediate. The original leaned heavily into camp, star power, and exaggerated performances. This sequel goes the opposite direction: less humor, fewer jokes, far more focus on survival. Instead of a charismatic villain, the threat here is constant and impersonal. The danger doesn't talk, it doesn't taunt, it just waits. The film also shares DNA with jungle survival stories like Predator and The Ruins, where the environment slowly turns against the characters. But unlike those films, this one centers its horror on escalation. Each encounter is worse than the last, each mistake more costly. Where it improves is atmosphere and pacing. Now the jungle feels alive, the tension builds steadily, and the snakes are treated as predators rather than spectacle. Where it falls short is character depth. You remember the danger more than the people. Still, among creature features, this sequel earns respect for one reason: it knows exactly what it is. No irony, no winks at the audience, just a survival story where humans are clearly not the apex predators anymore. This movie failed with critics but quietly won over audiences. When it hit theaters, critics weren't impressed. Reviews dismissed it as another disposable monster sequel, predictable, shallow, and unnecessary in a genre already crowded with creature features. But audiences told a different story. Viewers who went in expecting camp were surprised by how serious and relentless the film actually was. Over time, many fans began calling it an improvement over the original: darker, tighter, and far more focused on survival. This split created a strange reputation. Critics moved on quickly, but late-night cable runs, DVD releases, and streaming gave the film a second life. It slowly built a cult following, especially among fans of jungle horror and creature thrillers. Today it sits in that gray area: too grim to be fun trash, too straightforward to be prestige horror. And that's exactly why some people now argue it's underrated. It didn't try to redefine the genre, it tried to survive it, and sometimes that's enough. This isn't a great movie, but it is an honest one. It knows exactly what it is and never pretends to be more. It's a survival-driven creature thriller that puts atmosphere and tension ahead of character depth or big-name performances. Its strengths are clear. The jungle setting feels oppressive and alive. The escalation of danger is steady and effective, and the anacondas are treated less like gimmicks and more like predators shaped by human interference. But the weaknesses are just as obvious as the characters are thin, the plot beats are familiar, and if you're looking for emotional depth or originality, this film won't deliver. So who should watch it? If you enjoy jungle survival stories, creature features with real stakes, and films where humans are clearly outmatched, this one earns your time, especially if you dismissed it years ago and never looked back. This isn't a movie about conquering nature, it's about realizing far too late that you never stood a chance. And for what it sets out to do, this sequel gets the job done. Reviewer thoughts follow. I'll admit up front I was never a huge admirer of the original Anaconda, so my expectations for this sequel were pretty low. Surprisingly, Anacondas, The Hunt for the Blood Orchid turned out to be a step up in a few key areas. Yes, the storyline follows a very familiar path and the script can feel shaky at times, but it also delivers some sharp one-liners and moments of humor that help keep things moving. The direction is a bit restrained and the pacing uneven, yet what really worked for me was the increased tension and the reduced reliance on over-the-top silliness. When the movie aims for suspense, it generally succeeds, and that made a noticeable difference. Visually, the jungle locations are impressive, giving the film a strong sense of atmosphere. The effects are serviceable, far from perfect, but acceptable for this kind of movie, even though the anacondas themselves don't appear as often as you might expect. The music also does a solid job of enhancing the mood. Performance-wise, I found the cast more tolerable this time around. The leads are competent and likable enough, and thankfully there's no distracting accent work dragging the film down. In the end, it's an entertaining but imperfect sequel that does more right than I expected. That said, I did enjoy the first Anaconda as dumb but fun theater experience, so it was inevitable I'd eventually check out this follow-up. Unfortunately, it still suffers from the classic sequel problem, diminishing returns. While the original had recognizable faces and at least one major star, this installment relies mostly on lesser-known actors filling very familiar roles as the tough guy, the comic relief, the attractive leads, and the predictable wild card. There's even a character twist you can see coming from miles away. The plot revolves around a scientific expedition searching for a rare plant that supposedly holds revolutionary medical potential. Naturally, the team wanders into deadly territory and starts getting picked off by giant snakes. From there it's a mix of action beats, explosions, and inevitable casualties. And along the way the film leans heavily on cliché-copyright-ass and tired tropes, including an annoying animal sidekick that adds little to the experience. The biggest selling point is right there in the title, multiple anacondas instead of just one. On paper, that sounds like a smart escalation, similar to how Alien expanded into Aliens. In practice, budget limitations mean the snakes rarely share the screen, making the concept feel underused. Even worse, the CGI somehow looks less convincing than the effects in the first movie, despite the years between productions. Because of that, the death scenes feel repetitive and uninspired, with characters mostly being dragged away or pulled underwater. The tone and rating also keep everything fairly tame, which makes the movie feel more like a lightweight adventure than a proper creature feature. I usually enjoy jungle survival films, but this one often feels like busy work rather than excitement. At its core this is a classic B-movie, silly, predictable, and occasionally fun if you don't take it too seriously. There's no real connection to the original beyond the presence of man-eating snakes, and even that gimmick is stretched thin. The characters are mostly forgettable, the scares are minimal, and the visual effects don't hold up well. Still, if you're in the mood for mindless monster entertainment and can overlook its flaws, you might get some enjoyment out of it. I went into Anacondas, The Hunt for the Blood Orchid with very modest expectations, especially after seeing its low IMDb user score. Surprisingly, It turned out to be a pretty fun and engaging adventure. It leans heavily into action with a splash of humor, and a few moments genuinely made me laugh, particularly the scene where Cole jokingly compares Sam to Lorena Bobbitt after she decapitates one of the massive snakes. Sure, the movie checks off plenty of familiar B-movie tropes, and the plot rarely strays from predictable territory. Still, the final stretch offers a couple of unexpected beats that made the ride more enjoyable than I anticipated. I'd seen this sequel once or twice years ago, but revisiting the franchise felt almost like watching it fresh again. Aside from remembering the infamous orchid, most of the story had faded from memory, which worked in the film's favor. The screenplay follows a straightforward survival adventure structure clearly inspired by the 1997 original. Compared to that film, this installment moves at a quicker pace and focuses more on non-stop action. While that makes it energetic, it also sacrifices some of the slow burn tension that made the first movie more suspenseful. As a result, this sequel feels a bit lighter and less atmospheric, but still entertaining. If giant snake movies are your thing, there's no shortage of scaly screen time here. Director Dwight H. Little doesn't hold back, and the film delivers plenty of anaconda encounters. Visually, the snakes look decent for an early 2000s production, and their frequent appearances help keep the momentum going. The cast, however, doesn't quite match the impact of the original film's ensemble. Performances are serviceable, but few stand out in a memorable way. That said, Morris Chestnut, Johnny Messner, and Matthew Marsden were familiar faces that helped anchor the story. Messner in particular brings tough guy energy to his role as the river guide, delivering some unintentionally funny one-liners, including a blunt comment about his boat that perfectly captures the film's pulpy tone. The story itself is delightfully absurd. It opens with a native in Borneo narrowly escaping one deadly predator only to fall victim to another, setting the tone for a jungle where nature is very much out of control. A team of scientists soon arrives searching for the mythical Blood Orchid, a rare plant rumored to possess life-extending properties. The catch: it blooms for only a short window every few years, and they're racing against time. Their journey upriver during the rainy season quickly turns chaotic. Overpriced guides, dangerous shortcuts, waterfalls, and a boat wreck that somehow leaves everyone alive, with their communication device still working. From there, the group treks through the jungle, where members are picked off by unnaturally aggressive anacondas equipped with far more teeth than biology would suggest. As if that weren't enough, a planned rescue goes up in flames, literally forcing the survivors to seek help from a local tribe, only to discover the snakes got there first. With mating season in full swing and corporate greed pushing the mission forward, it's obvious things won't end well for everyone involved. Yes, the plot has holes you could drive the boat through, and logic often takes a back seat to spectacle, but that's kind of the point. The scenery is lush, the danger is constant, and the film embraces its over-the-top nature without apology. The acting ranges from decent to forgettable, but for a creature feature sequel, it gets the job done. All things considered, this isn't a great movie, but it is a watchable and sometimes surprisingly fun one. If you're in the mood for jungle chaos, giant snakes, and unapologetic B-movie energy, this delivers. The film drops viewers straight into a deadly jungle nightmare where enormous anacondas relentlessly hunt their victims. As the expedition spirals into chaos, the group is forced into a brutal struggle for survival against one of nature's most terrifying predators. Every snake encounter delivers genuine tension, packing the movie with sharp jolts of fear whenever these massive creatures strike. Visually, the film is a standout as the anacondas are created through a combination of CGI and animatronics, giving them a disturbingly lifelike presence. They slither, strike, and coil with convincing weight and menace. The cast commits fully, throwing themselves into intense physical action, sprinting through the jungle, leaping across obstacles, dangling over snake-infested pits, and barely escaping death at every turn. Still, the real stars are the snakes themselves, impressively frightening and surprisingly believable. The score heightens the suspense perfectly, matching the action beat for beat, while the lush jungle visuals are captured with vibrant cinematography that adds both beauty and danger to the setting. Direction is handled with a steady hand, keeping the pacing tight and the action consistently engaging. Fans of earlier giant snake thrillers will find plenty to enjoy here, while it's not suitable for younger viewers due to graphic and violent attack scenes. Genre enthusiasts will appreciate the relentless intensity. If you enjoyed creature features like snakes on a plane, this one delivers similar thrills, just with a jungle survival twist. The story revolves around a scientific expedition racing against time to locate a rare jungle flower believed to possess powerful life-extending properties. Because it blooms only once every 7 years, the team faces enormous pressure to reach it before the narrow window closes. Their journey down dangerous rivers leads them straight into the territory of massive anacondas gathered for mating season, an extremely bad place to be. As the mission unravels, alliances fracture, desperation rises, and greed pushes certain characters to take reckless risks. The film sprinkles in pseudo-scientific elements, as some grounded, others clearly exaggerated for dramatic effect, but they serve to keep the tension high rather than distract. Along the way, unexpected moments of dark humor break the tension, especially during one unforgettable rescue scene that quickly becomes a standout moment. One surprising highlight is an uncredited supporting character who steals scenes through expressive reactions and perfectly timed moments, proving that sometimes the most memorable performances come from unexpected places. Overall, while critics may question whether this franchise needed another installment, the movie remains an entertaining jungle thriller packed with action, suspense, and monstrous spectacle. It's not reinventing the genre, but it knows exactly what it is and delivers fast-paced, creature-driven fun for fans of survival horror and adventure cinema. This sequel sends a group of scientists deep into the jungles of Borneo on a risky mission funded by a pharmaceutical company. Their goal is the legendary Blood Orchid, a rare plant rumored to contain properties that could dramatically extend human life. The team travels upriver by boat, but a violent accident leaves them marooned in hostile terrain, surrounded by natural dangers and, eventually, massive anacondas. As tensions rise, it becomes clear that not everyone on the expedition is motivated by science. Jack, one of the group's leaders, gradually reveals how far he's willing to go to claim the orchid for himself, and his obsession spirals into outright betrayal when he steals the raft the survivors hoped would lead them back to safety. Forced to chase him through the jungle, Sam, Bill, Gale, Stern, and Colbert push onward despite exhaustion, fear, and the ever-present threat of predators. The climax delivers peak jungle chaos. Jack ultimately reaches the Blood Orchid, but his victory is short-lived as he plunges into a pit filled with anacondas, and a flare ignites a nearby fuel container, turning the snake nest into a fiery death trap. The remaining survivors escape at last, drifting away on the reclaimed raft as the jungle claims what's left behind. The cast includes Nicholas Gonzalez as Dr. Ben Douglas and Eugene Bird as John Livingston, while Johnny Messner leans hard into Jack's descent into madness. His unhinged performance is arguably the most entertaining part of the movie as his desperation becomes increasingly wild and reckless. Unfortunately, the film seems far more fascinated with the flower and the human greed surrounding it than with the snakes themselves, which appear surprisingly infrequently for a creature feature. As a follow-up, the movie lacks the name recognition of the original. Morris Chestnut is the most recognizable face, and while that's not nothing, the rest of the cast is largely made up of familiar that guy actors. Still, the director understands exactly what kind of movie this is supposed to be: loud, silly, and unapologetically dumb fun. The action is exaggerated, the horror is broad, and the characters are unapologetic stereotypes: the gruff action hero, the fearless sidekick, the glamorous scientist, the sassy team member, the slimy villain, and the shrieking comic relief. There's even a cute capuchin monkey thrown in for good measure. Visually, the jungle setting does a lot of heavy lifting, and the lush environment gives the film a sense of scale and atmosphere. even when the CGI anacondas themselves don't fully convince. Thankfully, the creatures are often hidden in darkness or water, which helps mask their limitations. The danger doesn't come solely from snakes. Either crocodiles, treacherous rivers, parasitic leeches, venomous insects, and human treachery all pile on the misery. That said, this isn't a movie that rewards close scrutiny. It requires the audience to ignore inconvenient facts, like the reality that anacondas don't actually live in Borneo, and just go along for the ride. If you can shut your brain off, you may find some enjoyment in the chaos. If not, the experience can feel repetitive and dull. Despite claims from some fans that the film is criminally underrated, that feels like a stretch. It's a late sequel that closely mirrors the original almost beat for beat, swapping out characters while repeating the same basic structure. The plot is thin, the writing is simplistic, and the characters feel like they walked straight out of a checklist. By the time the credits roll, it's hard to remember much beyond giant snakes attack people in a jungle, which says a lot. In the end, this is a disposable jungle adventure that aims for popcorn thrills and occasionally lands them, but just as often misses. It's no surprise the film earned a Razzie nomination for Worst Sequel or Remake. Adequate at best, forgettable at worst. The expedition kicks off with a group of researchers hiring a swaggering river guide who clearly thinks he's the second coming of Crocodile Dundee. That confidence doesn't last long. Before anyone can blink, the boat plunges over a waterfall, dumping the entire crew into an unforgiving jungle with no easy way out. Things go from bad to worse when they discover they're not dealing with a single oversized snake but an entire nest of them. Thanks to mating season, when these supposedly territorial monsters suddenly forget the rulebook and start swarming anacondas. The Hunt for the Blood Orchid is frankly a pretty stupid movie, but not a dull one. The most amusing part is watching the cast struggle to treat the material with absolute seriousness, as if they're starring in a prestige creature epic. The film would have benefited greatly from leaning into its B-movie roots, embracing excess and shameless overacting the way Jon Voight famously did in the original Anaconda. Instead, everyone plays it straight, and it feels oddly pretentious for a movie about man-eating snakes. The horror elements never really land. Being swallowed whole by a giant snake is nightmare fuel, yet the film barely taps into the fear. If suspense wasn't the priority, the attacks could at least have been nastier or more gleefully ridiculous, but they're surprisingly restrained. There's no real sleaze, no memorable shock value, and the characters are stacked with tired stereotypes that quickly wear thin. Add in some rough CGI that already looks dated, and you've got something that flirts with epic fail territory. Rewatching the film recently, it's clear the premise still has potential. A team of scientists and corporate reps trek into the jungle to find a rare orchid believed to extend life, only to realize that greed and infighting may be just as dangerous as the wildlife. Unfortunately, the execution is messy, the casting feels mismatched, the dialogue is clunky, and the visual effects sometimes resemble a mid-2000s video game cutscene awkwardly dropped into the movie. And yet it's still fun, despite lacking standout performances and never matching the unhinged energy of the first film. There's something undeniably entertaining here. The snakes are the real stars. They look imposing, move with weight, and deliver a few genuinely enjoyable set pieces. The swamp encounter, the hut attack, and the fiery chaos near the finale all offer moments of pulpy creature feature joy. The adventure-heavy first half, with its jungle treks and waterfall mishaps, is also entertaining, even if it delays the snake action a bit too long. In the end, this is a deeply flawed sequel that doesn't pretend to be good cinema, but if you accept it as loud, silly monster fun, it delivers enough thrills to justify the ride. The series may go downhill after this, but at least here the snakes still get a proper meal instead of settling for crumbs. This film ultimately suffers from a serious imbalance in how it uses its core concept. The very creatures meant to be the main attraction appear so rarely that by the time the movie reaches its final stretch, Events rush by in a chaotic blur. The climax feels less like a payoff and more like an afterthought to what often seems like a different story altogether. One focused more on the risks of chasing a mythical flower than on the monstrous threats promised by the title. Compounding the issue is a first half packed with filler scenes that exist mainly to stretch the runtime. Extended flirtation between characters and prolonged animal antics slow the pacing even further, leaving even less room for meaningful suspense. Adding to this is the noticeably weak CGI used for the snakes, which never quite sells their presence as believable or intimidating, ultimately dragging the film down. The story opens in a corporate boardroom, where executive Gordon Mitchell, played by Morris Chestnut, struggles to convince skeptical investors to keep backing his passion project. With no tangible results to show, the funding seems doomed until Mitchell unveils a startling revelation. Deep within the jungles of Borneo grows a legendary plant known as the Blood Orchid, a rare flower rumored to dramatically extend human life. This revelation instantly shifts the mood, and the sponsors greenlight an urgent expedition to retrieve it. The mission, however, is far from simple. The orchid grows in a remote region that becomes nearly inaccessible during the rainy season, making river transportation extremely dangerous. After some difficulty, the team assembles a small crew and secures a guide willing to take them upriver. What they fail to anticipate is that the jungle is home to enormous anacondas, far larger and far hungrier than anyone expects, standing directly between them and their miraculous discovery. Without giving too much away, I'll say I found this sequel slightly more enjoyable than the original, largely because it avoids repeating the over-the-top performance that dragged the previous entry down. Despite its flaws, this installment delivers enough action, tension, and lush scenery to stay engaging. The presence of two strong and charismatic actresses, KaDe Strickland as Sam Rogers and Sally Richardson Whitfield as Gail Stern, also adds to its appeal. That said, the movie can't quite decide what it wants to be. It awkwardly straddles the line between intentional camp and straightforward horror, never fully committing to either. Studios often try to pack in as many crowd-pleasing elements as possible: humor, romance, conventional scares, but here those ingredients don't quite blend. The anti-aging flower is an intriguing idea, yet it's weighed down by familiar character archetypes and routine action beats that fail to add anything fresh. Even the predictable jungle hazards feel tired, and the snakes themselves never become as frightening as they should have been. It's hard to believe this movie received a theatrical release, as it often feels more like a made-for-TV production. One of those films filled with attractive but questionably competent characters who seem destined to make poor decisions when digital wildlife attacks. Had it been made decades earlier, it might have ended with a pulpy rescue straight out of an old adventure serial. Ironically, such a film might have worked better simply because it would have been shorter and more tightly paced. In the end, not much happens during the first half beyond setup. We know from the title that danger is coming, yet the film relies on predictable faked-out scares that rarely land. When the snakes finally do take center stage, it feels a little too late. While the concept had potential, the execution never quite lives up to it. Overall, I didn't hate the movie, but I can't wholeheartedly recommend it either. It sits slightly above average, entertaining in moments, frustrating in others, and ultimately more memorable for what it could have been than for what it delivers. The most unsettling moments in this otherwise suspense-driven yet ultimately underwhelming thriller are the ones steeped in silence. As the fearless team trudges through the flooded jungle, the camera floats high above them, granting viewers a god's-eye view. From that height we can clearly see what the characters cannot: the massive body of an anaconda gliding beneath the murky water, its enormous coils slipping around them without disturbing the surface. This extended overhead shot is easily the film's most effective sequence, a carefully orchestrated moment of tension that the movie never manages to surpass. Sadly, this high point only emphasizes how much the rest of the film falters. A carelessly assembled script credited to 4 writers, combined with unimpressive, fully computer-generated snakes, drains the film of its bite. The original Anaconda also struggled with questionable visual effects, but its recognizable cast helped mask those flaws. Memorable performances, particularly a certain soaked pop star and an over-the-top villain, added personality and fun. In contrast, the sequel relies entirely on digital snakes that feel weightless and artificial. Ironically, the two serpents in the earlier film felt more distinct and expressive than the faceless swarm slithering through this one, none of which stand out as individuals or threats. The writers also fail to establish consistent rules for how these creatures behave. At one point we're told the snakes stop hunting once they've swallowed a human-sized meal, and moments later we learn they regurgitate their prey and continue attacking. This narrative whiplash makes it difficult to invest in the supposed danger. While the first half of this lean, 97-minute PG-13 adventure competently sets up goals and obstacles, the back half doesn't deliver on the promise of sustained dread or truly frightening encounters. The story follows a pharmaceutical expedition into the jungles of Borneo led by a polished British scientist and his ambitious business partner. Their mission: recover a rare flower known as the Blood Orchid, believed to hold the key to an age-defying drug, one predicted to outperform even the most lucrative miracle medications. The catch, of course, is that the flower blooms only once every 7 years, and the team arrives just in time for its brief flowering window. Once in Borneo, relentless rain complicates everything. Local guides refuse to help, forcing the group to hire an American drifter with a barely seaworthy barge, provided they can meet his steep asking price. His battered boat looks like it belongs in an old-school adventure film, and the river journey delivers the movie's most energetic action scene when a crocodile attacks one of the passengers. The ensuing scuffle with a reptile is far more gripping than any of the snake encounters that follow. A dramatic waterfall accident gives the director another opportunity for spectacle, though once again the environmental hazards prove more exciting than the film's supposed main attraction. Throughout it all, the anacondas lurk nearby, waiting, stranded, unarmed, and with survival odds dwindling. The group pushes forward, only to discover the snakes have been feeding on their blood orchid themselves, which conveniently explains their exaggerated size and aggression. Of course, this premise collapses under even mild scrutiny. Anacondas don't inhabit Borneo. The region is home to pythons, but the filmmakers take generous creative liberties with both geography and biology, resulting in a creature feature that feels half-baked. As internal conflicts fracture the group in the second half, the focus shifts to escape rather than discovery, but the snakes never feel genuinely threatening. Their lightning-fast attacks look more cartoonish than terrifying, undercutting what should be shocking death scenes. Compounding the issue, the film never clarifies how many snakes are involved, making it impossible to gauge progress or stakes. A couple of mild surprises regarding who survives and who doesn't can't rescue the uninspired final act. The restrictive PG-13 rating further softens what should have been brutal encounters. Still, the director, an industry veteran with experience in thrillers and action films, manages to squeeze out occasional atmospheric chills and small jolts. Viewers who are easily unsettled may find one particular supporting character, a small monkey, oddly nerve-wracking, but for most audiences this sequel coils up plenty of promise and then lets it slip away, never delivering the venom its premise suggests. Like a startled animal leaping out of the shadows, this film has a habit of jolting into action when you least expect it, creating brief bursts of chaos before settling back down. Taken as a whole, Anacondas, The Hunt for the Blood Orchid is a serviceable thriller that starts off stronger than it ends. While the opening half shows promise, the payoff is weakened by fake-looking snakes and a very familiar, by-the-number storyline. The movie kicks off in New York City, where pharmaceutical executive Gordon Mitchell is on the verge of losing a lucrative deal. Salvation appears in the form of Dr. Jack Byron, who claims to have uncovered something extraordinary, a rare substance derived from the elusive blood orchid, which, according to Byron, may hold the key to extending human life. The catch: the orchid grows only in the jungles of Borneo, blooms once every 7 years, and remains viable for just 2 weeks. Naturally, Corporate excitement takes over and an expedition is rushed into motion. Because it's the middle of monsoon season, no sensible river captain will take the job, leaving the team with little choice but to hire the rough-around-the-edges Captain Bill Johnson and his associate Ran, who operate a barely reliable boat. Along for the ride are Mitchell, Byron, lab assistant Sam Rogers, company liaison Gail Stern, team Dr. Ben Douglas, and resident tech nerd Cole Burris. Their journey upriver quickly turns into a nightmare as they encounter environmental hazards, internal tension, and, of course, massive aggressive anacondas. Directed by Dwight H. Little, this sequel to Anaconda, 1997, is undeniably an improvement over its predecessor, though that isn't saying much. The screenplay feels like a recycled monster movie template, a mismatched group stranded in hostile territory, expendable characters picked off one by one, and survivors eventually overcoming the creature. Anyone familiar with the original film will find very few surprises here, as cliché copyright and stock character types dominate the narrative. The script raises plenty of questions best left unexamined, like why helicopters aren't used at all despite being faster and safer. Some plot elements stretch credibility well past the breaking point, and the film plays fast and loose with biology and geography as the so-called scientific explanations are mostly nonsense, and the idea of anacondas thriving in Borneo is simply incorrect. Still, the movie moves at a decent pace, and if you keep expectations low, it can be a mildly entertaining way to kill about an hour and a half. Little's direction is competent but uninspired. Don't expect many genuine scares or shocking moments. The film leans more toward jungle adventure than horror, with the giant snakes sometimes feeling like a secondary concern rather than the main attraction. Gore fans will also be disappointed. There's very little blood to speak of. Despite a reported budget of around $25 million, the CGI snakes look surprisingly weak, even for a mid-2000s release. Filmed in Fiji and New Zealand, the scenery is lush but repetitive, with endless green jungle eventually becoming visually dull. Performances are uneven. Johnny Messner's tough guy delivery feels forced. Eugene Bird's character is grating beyond belief, and the fact that he survives, let alone saves the day, feels like an extra insult. All things considered, this is a passable sequel if you approach it with tempered expectations. It's far from great, but it's still a noticeable step up from the original. Not memorable, not terrible, just a middling creature feature that could have been better and definitely could have been worse. Although the premise stretches credibility, the movie presents its absurdity with a surprisingly grounded, almost documentary-style seriousness, and that commitment pays off in several genuinely exciting moments, most notably a standout sequence involving a boat plunging over a massive waterfall. The overall vibe clearly draws inspiration from classic jungle adventures like Tarzan and King Kong, leaning into primal danger and exotic spectacle. The ensemble cast is deliberately diverse and built around recognizable archetypes: the dependable and likable boat captain, the attractive blonde, the smug and irritating Brit, the sharp-tongued Latina, the comic relief black supporting character, and several personalities filling the gaps in between. Johnny Messner's boat captain serves as a solid central hero, a charismatic, capable, and brave in a pulpy adventure sense, though not exaggerated into full-blown superhero territory. For roughly the first hour the film moves along at a brisk and entertaining pace. Unfortunately, that momentum fades as it approaches the final act. The last half hour is set almost entirely at night and heavy rain, making the action murky and visually confusing. On top of that, certain character decisions start to feel forced, as if the script needs them to behave foolishly just to keep the plot moving. Hardly a rare issue in this genre, but noticeable nonetheless. One minor disappointment is how little use the film makes of its two strongest female performers, KaDe Strickland and Sally Richardson Whitfield. This isn't a complaint about cheap exploitation, but rather that the camera simply doesn't do much to highlight their presence or fully capitalize on their screen appeal, something that was also an issue with Jennifer Lopez in the original Anaconda. Bottom line, If you're craving a jungle survival adventure in the spirit of Tarzan, King Kong, Rambo, or even Apocalypse Now, this sequel delivers enough thrills to satisfy. It doesn't quite match the original Anaconda, largely because it lacks that film's slow-burning tension and a villain as memorably slimy as Jon Voight's Snake Hunter. Still, it's a solid creature feature with genuine adventure and light horror elements, which raises a fair question. How does this movie get endlessly mocked while far more bloated jungle epics like Peter Jackson's King Kong are celebrated as untouchable masterpieces? That said, make no mistake, this is unapologetically a B-movie. From the opening scenes, which barely justify why anyone would willingly venture into one of the most dangerous jungles on Earth, it's clear the film is aimed squarely at fans of pulpy creature flicks. Ironically, the explanation for the oversized snakes is one of the more plausible elements, though by that point expectations may already be low enough for logic to sneak by unnoticed. The script is packed wall-to-wall with cliché copyright-esque, to the point where it feels like it was assembled by checking boxes rather than writing scenes. Predictability reigns supreme, and the characters are so thinly sketched that the easiest way to tell them apart is by identifying which annoying habit they've been assigned. When certain people inevitably get attacked, the reaction is often relief rather than shock. Jump scares are used liberally, and the dialogue ranges from awkward to outright painful. The expedition team feels like a checklist of stereotypes, a knockoff Crocodile Dundee type, a handful of token black characters, some vaguely resembling famous actors, and an Americanized Steve Irwin stand-in, a self-aware reference to a far superior dangerous creature film that only ends up highlighting how inferior this one is by comparison. Visually, the effects are serviceable, the CGI is noticeable but not disastrous, and for a mid-budget monster movie it does the job. Ultimately, this is a recommendation strictly for viewers who enjoy cheesy creature features and jungle chaos. What's perhaps most baffling is that this sequel exists at all, especially considering it arrives years after the modest success of Anaconda. Even more baffling is how closely it mirrors the original, swapping out a documentary crew for a scientific expedition yet somehow feeling even more directionless. The plot about a pharmaceutical giant chasing a rare orchid rumored to unlock eternal youth practically drips with corporate greed, complete with a ticking clock. Of course, the flower blooms only once every 7 years. Despite all of the money, the company still relies on sketchy barroom boat captains and questionable equipment, leading the crew straight into disaster. In the end, this film is flawed, formulaic, and frequently ridiculous, but for fans of B-movie jungle horror, that may be exactly the appeal. From the very first step into the jungle, the film launches headfirst into bad decisions. A group of scientists heads out during monsoon season, fully ignoring every obvious red flag imaginable. Not a single person pauses to suggest that maybe, just maybe, this expedition is a terrible idea. Naturally, this lack of common sense sets the stage for what follows. Massive, lethal snakes waiting patiently to strike. Leading the doomed expedition is Captain Bill Johnson, a name so painfully generic it practically advertises his lack of personality. Played by Johnny Messner, he captains the boat with his loyal first mate Tran and an impossibly adorable monkey named Kong, who somehow manages to steal more screen time than most of the human cast combined. After a series of mishaps, including a waterfall disaster, the group is forced to continue on foot through thick, unforgiving jungle terrain. One by one they become targets for a gigantic anaconda and several equally hungry companions. Conveniently, it happens to be mating season, meaning these oversized reptiles are both aggressive and constantly on the hunt, and unfortunately for the humans, they're the top item on the menu. One of the sequel's biggest weaknesses is its cast of paper-thin characters. The corporate executive who complains about losing her phone moments after being rescued from a crocodile, a smug humanitarian doctor straight out of a romance novel, the jumpy comic relief character clearly inspired by better genre films, and a suspicious scientist whose trustworthiness is questionable from the moment he opens his mouth. Morris Chestnut, the most recognizable name in the cast, delivers a performance that feels like a remix of familiar action thriller roles. Surprisingly, it's the quiet assistant character who ends up being the film's unexpected standout, evolving into a more capable survivor halfway through the chaos. The direction does little to elevate the material, and genuine scares are few and far between. That said, the visual effects are an improvement over the original film, as the CGI snakes look more convincing and are quicker, deadlier, and more efficient, though frustratingly not shown quite enough to leave a lasting impact. Despite its flaws, the film does manage something unexpected. It feels more like a standalone adventure than a carbon copy sequel. The story centers on the hunt for the rare Blood Orchid, a plant rumored to contain life-extending properties. Since the flower blooms for only a short window every several years, the expedition quickly turns into a race against time, and this ticking clock adds tension and keeps the narrative moving at a brisk pace. The jungle setting is a major plus. Lush scenery, muddy trails, and relentless rain give the movie a strong sense of atmosphere. The adventure and survival elements are easily the most enjoyable aspects, and the pacing is noticeably faster than the original film. While the characters are mostly familiar archetypes, the heroes, the morally gray figures, the villains, and the comic relief, they work well enough for a creature feature like this. At the end of the day, this movie isn't aiming for greatness, and it knows it. It's loud, silly, fast-moving fun with giant snakes, jungle peril, and just enough suspense to keep you watching. If you go in expecting a smart, prestige horror film, you're missing the point. But if you're looking for a pulpy jungle adventure packed with action, monsters, and escapist thrills, it delivers exactly what it promises. It may not be brilliant, but it is entertaining, and sometimes that's more than enough. At its core, this movie isn't really pretending to be anything more than what it is, a creature feature where people get swallowed by massive, angry snakes. The oversized anacondas are brought to life through CGI, and while the effects are serviceable, they're never truly jaw-dropping. The snakes look fairly convincing when they're gliding through the water or lurking in the shadows, but once they're fully revealed they lose a lot of their intimidation factor and start to feel oddly ordinary. The jungle setting, however, is one of the film's biggest strengths. Jungles are naturally effective backdrops for thrillers full of mystery and danger at every turn. Beyond the snakes, the movie throws in spiders, crocodiles, and other nasty creatures to keep the characters and the audience on edge. Unfortunately, the human element doesn't quite rise to the occasion. The cast is largely made up of unfamiliar faces, and most of them fail to leave a strong impression. Johnny Messner stands out the most as the tough, no-nonsense boat captain guiding the expedition, and he carries the film better than anyone else. Overall, this delivers exactly what you'd expect: plenty of action, plenty of giant snakes, and very little depth when it comes to story or character development. And honestly, that's fine. If you're just looking for an easy 90 minutes of entertainment, it does the job well enough. In fact, I found myself enjoying this sequel more than the original, which starred Jennifer Lopez, Ice Cube, and Jon Voight. Gone is the documentary crew and Voight's oddly accented villain. Instead we get a group of researchers and boat operators venturing deep into the jungles of Borneo in search of the elusive Blood Orchid, a rare plant that blooms once every 7 years and may hold the key to curing numerous diseases. Johnny Messner leads the group, often swinging a machete and carrying himself like a seasoned special forces operative. Matthew Marsden does a decent job as one of the researchers whose obsession with the orchid borders on reckless ambition driven by dreams of medical fame. Naturally, the jungle isn't just home to rare flowers. It's crawling with an entire nest of anacondas, which spells disaster for the expedition. There are several solid action and horror moments scattered throughout the film, but don't go in expecting anything groundbreaking. This is a straightforward action-adventure creature movie, nothing more and nothing less. It's entertaining enough for a single viewing. Watch it, enjoy it, and then, for the love of cinema, stop there. The later sequels are best left unseen. To be honest, I still can't quite explain why I revisited this series in the first place. I watched the original Anaconda years ago and didn't care for it at all. It barely stuck with me, aside from having a stronger cast and a more altruistic mission involving a documentary crew. This sequel, which features none of the original actors aside from a passing reference to a previous crew being eaten by snakes, shifts the expedition's purpose towards something far less noble. At this time the motivation revolves around profit and longevity. The Blood Orchid can supposedly produce a substance that extends human life, turning the story into a subtle critique of corporate greed, particularly within the pharmaceutical world. While there are plenty of snake attacks and the CGI is passable, the downtime between these moments isn't especially engaging. There is, however, a small bright spot in the form of a monkey whose survival becomes oddly important to root for. In the end, my reaction mirrors how I felt about the first film. It's a silly movie, mildly suspenseful, occasionally entertaining, but ultimately forgettable. Years ago I described the characters in Anaconda as one-dimensional. At least those characters had a dimension. Here the cast feels flat and unremarkable. Chances are, by tomorrow this movie will have completely slipped my mind. The film does manage to generate tension early on, though it begins to drag as it approaches the finale. The plot centers on the scientific corporation's interest in the Blood Orchid, rumored to contain the secret to eternal youth. Bill Johnson, Johnny Messner, is hired to captain the boat alongside Dr. Jack Byron, Matthew Marsden, and a mixed group of researchers. Their journey through the jungle is filled with deadly wildlife, including massive snakes, vicious spiders, and other hazards. One standout sequence involves their boat plunging over a waterfall, followed by the eerie discovery of where the wreckage and belongings resurface. This film takes a fairly weak concept, populated with bland characters, but places everything inside a genuinely impressive setting. The film clearly has ambition, even if budgetary and writing limitations hold it back. Calling it completely incompetent would be unfair, but labeling it a truly worthy sequel would be just as much of a stretch. I've always been in the minority when it comes to the 1997 Anaconda. I actually enjoyed it. Ice Cube and Jennifer Lopez leading a cheesy creature feature? Count me in. I'll admit my bias up front. I've always had a soft spot for movies where nature turns hostile and humans are suddenly at the bottom of the food chain. It's an easy genre to stumble into but surprisingly hard to execute well. Still, if a film leans into its campiness, has a few characters you don't outright despise, and sprinkles in some entertaining survival moments, I'm usually on board. Creature features have always been my thing, especially franchises like Tremors. Though that's a rabbit hole for another day. This sequel shifts focus to a scientific expedition heading into the jungles of Borneo. Their goal is to locate the legendary Blood Orchid, a rare plant rumored to extend human life and potentially cure diseases. The team includes Jack, Ben, Gordon, Tran, Samantha, Gail, and Cole, all operating under the command of the ruthless and profit-driven Bill Johnson. Most of the group is reasonably competent, though Cole exists mainly to deliver loud, unnecessary commentary whenever possible. As expected, nothing goes smoothly as the jungle is drenched in endless rain, tempers flare, and because this is an Anaconda movie, a massive man-eating snake makes its presence known. After one unfortunate team member becomes lunch, Bill confidently suggests the snake should be satisfied unless, of course, it's mating season. Spoiler alert, it is. Character depth isn't exactly this movie's strong suit. Most of the cast feels like rough sketches rather than fully formed people, thin archetypes held together by cliché copyright and convenience. That said, while the characters are weak on paper, the actors themselves generally do what they can with the material. Where the film does shine is in its visual presentation. The cinematography is surprisingly lush and atmospheric. The jungle feels alive, and you can almost hear the insects buzzing and feel the oppressive humidity through the screen. Much like the original film, there's a grimy realism to the environment that works in the movie's favor, even if it's not exactly pleasant. The scares, however, are fairly tame. While the original Anaconda managed a few memorable moments, this sequel plays it safer. The visual effects are serviceable but clearly limited, which wouldn't be a major issue if the action weren't so often hidden in darkness. Much of the movie takes place at night, resulting in murky, dimly lit scenes where it's hard to see what's happening. Never a great choice for a creature feature. Ultimately, this film feels like a sequel made simply because it could be. It's not terrible, but it's hardly inspired. A couple of strong performances and impressive jungle cinematography keep it from being completely forgettable. Yet it lacks excitement, tension, and genuine surprises. Most notably, it's missing the over-the-top personality that made the first film oddly memorable, something only Jon Voight could have delivered. Cast includes Johnny Messner, KaDe Strickland, Matthew Marsden, Nicholas Gonzalez, Eugene Bird, Carl Yoon, Sally Richardson, and Morris Chestnut, with direction by Dwight H. Little. Even though I wasn't completely sold on the original Anaconda, I gave this sequel a chance. After all, sequels usually promise a higher body count, and in that sense it delivers. The death scenes are more elaborate and bloodier, and the danger escalates quickly. Suspicion runs high, greed takes over certain characters, as it always does, and you find yourself waiting for karma to strike, preferably in the form of a giant snake. That said, the movie stretches believability even by horror standards. I know realism isn't the goal here, but it's hard not to roll your eyes at some of the decisions these characters make. I want to believe there's a killer anaconda lurking in the jungle hunting foolish humans, but the movie doesn't always sell it convincingly. Overall, it's slightly more enjoyable than the first film in some areas, mainly due to the expanded plot involving the Blood Orchid expedition. Still, it leans too heavily on CGI and doesn't fully capitalize on its premise. Even members of the cast reportedly voiced frustrations during production, which honestly tracks with what ends up on screen. While marketed as a straightforward sequel, the movie tells an almost entirely new story, trading the river adventure for a jungle-bound hunt tied to scientific ambition and corporate greed. There's more narrative structure this time around, but whether that makes it better is still up for debate. Like its predecessor, this film leans heavily on CGI-driven snake mayhem, complete with familiar monster-chasing human scenarios, non-stop screaming, and characters constantly clashing with one another. There's no shortage of action, which helps the runtime move along quickly, even if much of it feels over the top. Toss in some exaggerated performances and a handful of goofy surprises, and the movie manages to be mildly entertaining at best. This is strictly a watch it if there's absolutely nothing else on kind of experience. This second installment in the series isn't a direct continuation of the original story. Instead, it functions as a standalone entry with an entirely new cast. Unlike the first film's occasional campy tone, this one tries to take itself more seriously. Action scenes are more frequent and far more intense, and the threat level is raised by introducing multiple giant snakes rather than just one. The ensemble cast does a serviceable job given the material, and the characters range from likable to downright irritating, with a few clearly designed to be despised. Their motivations are at least defined, which helps keep the story moving. While the plot sometimes stretches believability, that kind of exaggeration is expected in a creature feature. Overall, it's fast-paced, energetic, and delivers a few exciting moments, as long as you don't expect anything profound. The story centers on a group of researchers venturing into the jungles of Borneo in search of a rare flower rumored to possess life-extending properties. Naturally, their noble scientific mission is derailed when they stumble on massive, deadly snakes that begin picking them off one by one. So much for the promise of eternal youth. At its core, this is a fairly generic monster movie that doesn't bring much originality to the table. Suspense is minimal since the snakes are usually visible well before they strike, and their straightforward attack style doesn't leave much room for tension. This also means the visual effects don't always need to work very hard, which becomes obvious. The performances aren't great, but it's hard to fault the actors when the characters are written as thin stereotypes, and the dialogue feels dated. as if lifted from an old drive-in creature flick. Although the film attempts to expand the world introduced in the original Anaconda, it ends up being one of the weaker entries in the franchise. While it clearly exists in the same universe as the 1997 film, it lacks the grit, suspense, and grounded danger that made the original memorable. Instead, it relies too much on digital effects that often fail to convince, pulling viewers out of the moment whenever the snakes appear on screen. The excessive use of CGI is easily the film's biggest flaw. The anacondas rarely look realistic enough to be intimidating, which drains the fear from scenes meant to be intense. Moments that should feel suspenseful instead come across as unintentionally silly. When the main threat doesn't work, everything else struggles to compensate. The cast delivers uneven performances, with a few actors managing to rise above the limitations of the script. Unfortunately, the writing doesn't give them much to work with. The tone shifts constantly and the pacing feels uneven, jumping from one chaotic situation to the next without properly building tension. Instead of crafting suspense, the movie simply throws characters into danger and hopes the spectacle will carry the scene. The premise itself, a searching for a rare plant with potential medical benefits, is actually intriguing, but that idea gets buried under messy storytelling and inconsistent execution. What could have been a compelling adventure ends up feeling like a series of loosely connected events rather than a cohesive journey. The quest for the flower becomes more of a plot device than a meaningful narrative focus. Despite all of this, the movie isn't completely unwatchable. It's far from the worst sequel in the creature feature genre and offers a few moments of dumb fun. While it doesn't capture the tension or charm of the first film, it works as a low-effort watch if your expectations are set appropriately. It's forgettable but not unbearable. In the end, this is the kind of movie you'd only revisit if you're already thinking about the original and feel like exploring the rest of the franchise. It doesn't elevate the series or stand strongly on its own, but it can function as background entertainment if you're in the mood for jungle chaos and giant snakes. Even if the thrills don't always hit, no one is going to walk away calling it a classic, but for some viewers it may be just watchable enough. The movie may not be high art, but it delivers enough to justify its runtime. It's an entertaining 90 minutes that doesn't skimp on action, even if it leans heavily into camp. There's no denying this is a B-movie, but let's be honest, some B-movies eventually earn cult status. The performances tend to slip during the more dramatic moments, and a few scenes are unintentionally funny thanks to some less than stellar acting. Still, that charm is part of the experience. Aside from featuring massive killer snakes and a quick nod to a previous expedition that didn't end well, this film barely functions as a traditional sequel, and oddly enough that works in its favor. The cast overall feels stronger this time around, and despite the cheesy delivery, you actually find yourself rooting for most of them to make it out alive. One thing the movie does surprisingly well is avoid the rigid who dies next formula common to monster and slasher films. More than just a token survivor makes it to the end, and a few unexpected turns help keep things interesting when you're expecting the usual body count progression. There aren't any marquee names headlining this entry, but a few actors still manage to stand out. The boat captain character, who initially seems like he'll fill the same villain role as before, turns out to be more of a rough-edged hero. That switch works, and the actor pulls it off convincingly enough that you could easily imagine him carrying a future film. On the flip side, one of the main characters spends most of the movie panicking, screaming, running, complaining, and generally being a magnet for trouble. What might have been intended as comic relief quickly becomes grating and is easily the most annoying performance in the film. The female lead is serviceable but underutilized. She's positioned as the emotional center and the focus of several characters' attention, yet no single actor truly emerges as the clear protagonist. The spotlight is spread thin, which isn't necessarily bad, but it does leave the movie without a strong anchor. Story-wise, the setup is solid enough. A research team heads deep into the jungle in search of a rare plant rumored to have life-extending properties. After an accident strands them in hostile territory, They find themselves being stalked by enormous snakes in the middle of mating season. One of the smarter touches is tying the snake's abnormal size and aggression directly to the plant itself, giving some internal logic to the threat instead of leaving the creatures as purely absurd monsters. Interestingly, the snakes aren't always the main focus. Much of the film plays out more like a survival thriller, with the tension coming from the environment, the injuries, and the group dynamics as much as from the creatures hunting them. No one gives a truly standout performance, but everyone does well enough to keep things moving. It's an average movie, but that's not a bad thing. It's exactly the kind of mindless action flick that works when you don't want to think too hard. Looking back, the original film was never a masterpiece either. It was silly creature feature fun and harmless entertainment if you left your expectations at the door. Revisiting the franchise years later and diving into the sequels feels more like curiosity-driven binging than serious film study. This installment isn't the strongest introduction to that run, but given the premise, it easily could have been worse. The plot leans heavily on familiar tropes: a powerful corporation, a miracle plant with near-mythical properties, and a doomed jungle expedition. Everything unfolds exactly how you'd expect, which both hurts and helps the movie. Playing it safe strips away any chance of greatness, but it also keeps the film from being a total disaster. Budget limitations are obvious, especially when it comes to the visual effects, which are hit or miss at best. There's one recognizable actor in the cast, but even he isn't positioned as the main lead. At the end of the day, it's flawed, dumb, and predictable, but it's also a movie about a giant snake, so disappointment kind of comes with the territory if you walk in expecting more. There are a few genuinely nice shots, and the jungle setting does a lot of the heavy lifting. On the downside, the special effects frequently fall short, the supposed comic relief wears out its welcome fast, and the story sticks closely to well-worn genre cliché copyright-s. A few takeaways: monkeys automatically improve any movie they're in, and whoever designed the snakes may not have spent much time studying real ones. The sequel mirrors the original so closely once the characters hit the jungle that it sometimes feels like a remix. Even character roles are swapped around, with the shady captain becoming the hardened hero. The cast looks suspiciously familiar in type, and certain scenes feel lifted straight from the earlier film, right down to wading through snake-infested water. The movie also expects you to accept that a snake the length of a building can move with the speed and agility of a big cat, and oddly enough no one seems particularly shocked by this. The creature itself is more silly than scary, though the villainous presence added by the human antagonist does help balance things out. Overall, it's not great, but it's watchable. If you're in the mood for predictable jungle chaos, oversized reptiles, and low-effort thrills, it does the job. As long as you know exactly what kind of movie you're signing up for. You could tell from the start this was never going to end well for anyone involved. Honestly, no one was exactly begging for a follow-up to the ridiculously over-the-top 1997 creature flick Anaconda. Still, it somehow made enough money to convince the studio to squeeze out another one, because of course it did. That's Hollywood for you. And yes, if endless horror sequels have taught us anything, nothing is ever truly finished. Against all expectations, this sequel turns out to be surprisingly decent for what it is. Originally planned as a straight-to-video release, Sony apparently liked what they saw during production so much that they boosted the budget and pushed it into theaters. While it still can't compete with big-budget studio spectacles, the filmmakers clearly made the best movie they could with the resources they had. This time around, there's a bit more ambition in the story. Instead of pure monster mayhem, the plot revolves around a rare and mysterious flower known as the Blood Orchid, said to bloom only once every 7 years and rumored to hold the secret to eternal life. That added layer gives the script a little more depth than a simple snake attacks everyone setup. The story follows a group of scientists venturing deep into the jungles of Borneo, and from the beginning everything feels off. They're stuck with a rundown boat. The rainy season has turned the rivers into death traps, and their guide is a tough, no-nonsense former Special Forces soldier, played by Johnny Messner, who happens to own an impossibly adorable pet monkey. Red flags everywhere. Things go from bad to worse when giant crocodiles attack. The boat plunges over a waterfall, and the expedition is left stranded. Just when it seems like survival might still be possible, someone gets swallowed whole by an anaconda. From there, it's a steady descent into chaos. Unlike the first film's predictable body count formula, this sequel focuses more on tension, character conflict, and group dynamics. The characters themselves aren't especially memorable, but the cast does a respectable job with the material. Messner stands out, holding things together as danger lurks in every shadow. Gone are the likes of Jennifer Lopez, Ice Cube, and Jon Voight, though they get a quick nod, replaced by Morris Chestnut and Sally Richardson, who are clearly marked as potential snake snacks. To make matters worse, it's mating season, multiple giant snakes, one massive feeding and breeding ground, and naturally the blood orchids grow directly above it. Perfect timing. What could possibly go wrong? Director Dwight H. Little brings a noticeable upgrade in style and atmosphere compared to the original, known for Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, and Free Willy 2. Yes, really, he gives the film a darker, more serious tone. While it builds strong suspense and promises a truly brutal payoff, it stops just short of greatness.